Hi everybody. So this week we're going to add a few things to our Invaders clone to finish it off. We're going to add a, let's see, scorekeeper. We're going to add a start screen, a instructions screen, custom fonts, and particle emitters for the explosions whenever your enemies die. If you already have all this stuff, then I just want you to add more polish to it, customize the heck out of it. But if you don't have it, then just follow along and we'll get it started. So by now, you should have your game where you're instantiating your enemies, you're moving around, and then you're getting a little error. Ugh, hold on, it's because I was doing some things to it, and so it's looking for something it doesn't have. But anyway, so your enemy should be dying, or at least disappearing, and until they're gone. What we need to do in order to add scorekeeper in here is we're going to be modifying the bullet script in addition to using our scorekeeper script from breakout. So we're going to set it up exactly the same way. We're just going to have a 3D text object. We're going to call it scorekeeper. This has to be your scorekeeper because scorekeeper, the add to score function on scorekeeper will be accessing a text mesh. It'll be looking for that component. So you want to make sure you do that. You can just scale it up ridiculously. I like to move all my anchors to the center. It just makes it easier to mess with. Oops. And scale it down. Now, I think regular Invaders has the score like up here at the top or something. We're just gonna move it, off to the right or something. I don't know. We could put it directly underneath our guy here. Maybe just scale it down a little bit more. Just put it at 0, 0 here since enemy boy here isn't directly underneath. Move him up just a tiny bit. Okay, and then let's change this to 0. We need to add our scorekeeper script onto that. We need to tell it that it is itself a text mesh and that it is itself the scorekeeper script that it's looking for. The next thing we need to do is come to bullet, open up your bullet script. We're going to add a couple of lines in here. Mainly we're going to add this line right here in the if check for the enemy collision. If you do have this set as a trigger, you can do it either way. You can either have it set as a collision or as a trigger. If you have it set as a collider, you may get some weird bugs where your bullet will sort of slide past. If that's happening and you want it to just be smooth, you can just change it to you can change it to a trigger, but then you need to change your type to collider 2D, collider 2D. That should work. And then you just want to make sure that your enemies, your invaders, are set up as triggers. So you can just shift select all of them and then check the trigger box. But to come back to the bullet script, let's take a look here. The line we're adding is it's a find feature of the game object. So it's just GameObject.find, and then you're looking for a game object that has the exact name scorekeeper, so you need to make sure that this string you stick in here is exactly what your text mesh object here is called. And so it's going to look for that guy. When it finds that guy, it's then going to look for a component on it called scorekeeper. This is the script down here, so it needs to be exactly what your script is called. And then once it finds that, it's going to access the function add to score within scorekeeper. And if we open up scorekeeper, you'll remember that we've got this function down here called add to score, where it takes whatever the existing score is and adds another one to it, and then plugs that into the text mesh component of itself, which is this part. So it's all pretty straightforward. It's exactly like we did with breakout. The only difference is because we're instantiating objects, we're instantiating the bullet. It doesn't exist at runtime. What I mean by that, it doesn't exist whenever the game immediately loads. It gets called and it gets created as needed. We have to then tell it to take a look around in the scene, in that hierarchy, and find this particular object and this particular component on the object, and then access that function in that script that's on that object. So it's a little, it has to do with performance and upkeep and the fact that prefabs, like instead of, you'd think that normally we'd be able to just access our bullet and then drag and drop it down here where we can't see. So like your prefab will always say that it can't find it because the prefab doesn't actually exist in the game yet. The prefab is just in your project directory. And prefabs, the whole point of prefabs is that they're universal, that they can be used between scenes, that they're not scene dependent. And so you can't assign a specific game object from a scene to a prefab. It just doesn't work. If that object that you assign doesn't exist in other scenes, then that prefab is broken. So they just don't let you do it, and the way to get around it is to just do this GameObject.find whenever you need it. So it's just like telling the bullet to stop and for a nanosecond and look around. All right, so put that in there. I usually just do it right after the debug. Right, but definitely do it before the destroy. If you do the destroy, it'll still work, but there's a little lag in there, so it's not terrible. You just want to watch out for that because sometimes, like if you were to do it after this destroy, which is destroying the actual bullet, it wouldn't get called because this line would execute and then that bullet would no longer exist, and so the script would no longer run. So you just want to be really careful when you're using destroy what order you have your calls in. So okay, let's test it. There we go. Come here, buddy. Crap. Oh, he goes faster than I do. There, got him. Okay. All right, so score is working. That's great. The next thing we want to do is a start screen. Start screens are pretty simple. They're just another scene. So just create a, oh yeah, just hit Control N. Be sure to save it. So you got a new scene, then hit Control S. Save it as start, and let's put it in our scene folder. You'll see start shows up there. You can then configure it to your heart's content. We're going to put a 3D text object in here again. Camera, right place, yeah, okay. Just to pop this guy in here. We're going to call him, it's just going to say, press spacebar to start or something like that. However we set it up. It's totally up to you. Middle center, and then scale him down. All right, so he's in the center, and we'll say press start, and press spacebar. Obviously a little big. Now you can do custom fonts as well in Unity. They're a lot of fun to mess with, but you have to set them up kind of in a specific way. So let's create a folder called fonts. Within this folder, we're going to drop some fonts in there. I like to use fonts from Defont. I'm partial to some pixel fonts that they have. You can grab whatever you want. The thing that you want to double check, I don't see where it is right now. You generally want to make sure that you're using a TTF, a true type font. This one should be fine. Probably has both TTF and yeah, okay, it's got TTF in there. All right, so let's drop TTF in there. So you can really just come and drop that sucker. Pixelade, grab it, drop it right there. And it will automatically see it. It will open it, and you'll have two things. You'll have a font texture and a font material. All right, and these are both very important. So what we're going to do is come to our new text, we are going to say, hey, we want to use Pixelade, not Arial, and bam, it's done. If you're using TTF, it will be automatic. It will work for you just fine. You just have to tell it a different material to use. You can then, of course, change the color to whatever you want, play around with it. Now, the script obviously doesn't do anything, or this thing doesn't obviously do anything because we don't have a script on it. And so we're going to add our little start script to it. So hit space, pretty easy. We're going to just drop hit space onto it. Hit space, if we open it up, it's just a update. It's looking for get button down Willy Wonka. Don't worry about that. You can change it to space, all lowercase, application, load level, and we're going to load level, level 1. We'll talk about that here now. Actually, no, we'll talk about it now. So you want to make sure that whatever you type in here is exactly what that button is called, and you can check that by coming to Edit, Project Settings, Input, and then over here in your inspector, axes side, and then you're going to look for something like jump, which you'll see positive button is space, so it's lowercase. Should all be fine. Yeah, okay. So you can save it. Let's clear our debug. But then, you know, it's just going to call something else. You know, it's that hit space 1 is looking to start, you know, it's looking for a level with the number 1 associated to it. And why would the number 1 be associated with the level? And that happens to be its index number. You can check the index number of a level or a scene, which is what levels are, by checking build settings. You'll see that the breakout is my 0. I'm going to delete it. I want to add invaders, start, and then our instructions will be in here as well. Start is going to be 0. That's going to be the index number. We can come over here and just should be able to edit it. There we go. Should just drag and drop to rearrange them. So your whatever scene or whatever level has the index number of 0, that's the one that will start first. That's the one that will load first. That's the one that they'll see first. So generally, you want this to be your title scene and all that stuff. Invader or 1 would then be the next one, 2, etc., etc. So we're gonna now create. You don't need to hit build or build run or anything. It'll just automatically save these. You can also put in a title. I guess I didn't do that, did I? Actually, you know what? Instead of just creating a new one, why don't we just duplicate one? Let's hit spacebar to start there, and then we will grab title Invaders. And then we will make it, oops, much bigger. Okay. Change the color. Yeah. It's red. Oops. Gosh, I always do that. I always want to grab it in the game scene. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So this is our hit start. Press spacebar to start is listening for the spacebar, so it will then load our instructions scene whenever we actually create it. So hit N, create a new one. Hit S to save it. Make sure you're saving it in your scenes folder, just to keep things organized, and call it instructions. You can then set it up correctly, what you want it to be. I don't remember what color I just used. And then, you know, you can just drop in the 3D GUI text or do whatever you want to have it set up as the so it does instructions. Yeah. Middle, center. you know, and then just set this up to be whatever, like, trying to remember what the, yeah, okay. So option enter gives you a new line. Equals. Spacebar shoots. Okay, save it, position it the way you want it to be, and then you're just going to want to stick, you know, essentially another version of with your instructions set up the way you want it to be. We're going to add the hit space script onto it. You're going to make some changes to hit space from what I just told you. Let's just go in here. What we're going to look at here is that we're going to set up this variable called next level. It's going to be a string of type string, because when we pass information to application of level, it needs to either be an index number or it needs to be the exact name of the level. Passing index numbers as integers is problematic sometimes. It gets buggy, so I tend to just pass the actual name. So when get button down jump, put jump, not space. I know I said space earlier, but it's actually looking for the name in the index, it's actually looking for one of these names. So you could duplicate one and just change the name to space and set it up as the spacebar, but it's fine just to use jump, because that is the spacebar. Then application to level, plug in your variable name. This will let you change it in the inspector. Once it's assigned to your object, make sure that it's the string you're passing to application to level is the exact name of the level that you want to go to. It's the exact name of the scene. So invaders. The same thing for start. Hit to start. Instructions, because it's going to the scene instructions, and then that's actually going to the invader scene. When you do this, make sure you go to build settings and you have them set up in the correct order in your build settings. You can just drag them in here and rearrange them. So if I drag them in incorrectly, I can just grab them and rearrange them, but it should go 0, 1, 2. It's not so important that they're in the correct order, but it's just good practice. Since we are calling them by name, we're not really referencing the index number at all. It doesn't matter, but you definitely don't want it to start on the invaders, you know, so you'd want it to start here. So start does need to be 0, but instructions and invaders can be flip-flopped. It would still work, it's just sloppy, so don't do it. You can do it, well, like I said, it'll work, but just don't do it. Anyway, let's move on. So that's how you set up, let's test it. That's how you set that up. Hit spacebar, it'll work. You may get an error sometimes. Let's go to start and go from there. So we hit spacebar. See, you may get this error that says, you'll see it down here, level -1 cannot be loaded because it hasn't been added to the build scenes. I don't know why this is happening. We're not calling level 1. The string isn't called level 1. I don't know. It still works. Come here and hit spacebar. Everything still works just fine. So don't worry about it. It should just keep working. So once that's set up, come back to your invader scene. We're going to set up the explosions prefab to happen whenever the enemy dies or the enemy hits the player and the player dies. So come to your prefabs folder, create a new prefab just by going to create prefab. Call it explosion, and then we're going to come over here and create a new, particle system. We're going to play with this particle system a lot. There's a whole bunch of settings may want to drag your inspector out just a little bit. Duration, how long does it last? How many seconds? You can sort of, if you just mouse over it, the length of time the particle system is emitting particles. If it's looping, it's the length of one cycle. We're not actually going to loop, so we just want it to play and then die. Color, red. Gravity multiplier. You can have gravity if you want it to just drop. Let's simulate. So it'll do that. 5 seconds is a long time. I wouldn't necessarily do 5 seconds. Maybe like 2 seconds. That's kind of a lot. 1.25. Yeah, it's not bad. Simulation space local, play on awake. Yeah. Play it whenever it instantiates the object. Max particles are 1,000. Emission, you just click on it, rate, 10 time. That's fine. I mean, if you want more, make the number more. If you want less, make it less. Shape. Now, shape is the other important part. This is the shape of the emitter, not the shape of the sprite. So, is it emitting it out into a cone? Is it a box? Is it a hemisphere? I tend to go with a box for these kinds of explosions. You could do a sphere. Let's see. Nah, do a box. And actually, I'm going to turn gravity off. Actually, made these fields a little bigger. All right, so simulate. Okay, maybe not. Shooting it up. Well, we could turn it down, but still. Bizarre. That's good. That's really good. Yeah, I like that. Velocity over lifetime, you can play with that. You can do colors, different colors, color by speed, rotation, external forces, collisions, sub-emitters, renderers. Oh, there's all sorts of stuff. Okay, so the renderers is the interesting part. It's going to say default renderer, which you can mess with. I don't necessarily want the default particle emitter. I may do sprite default, which is just a square. I kind of like the square size. Max particle size. I'm going to make them smaller. Maybe we'll turn on loop just for what we're doing right now. Let's go shape, radius, emission, start size. Let's go lower. So you make them whatever you want them to be. You can turn your speed down to, start speed is pretty high. And then let's go, gosh, you can make them even, you can make them last even less. 0.6. Oh yeah, turn off loop. So that's pretty good. I like that one. For me, that works. There is like change velocity. You could group them tighter by just playing around with your settings. Some of that is turn your speed down quite a bit. Maybe that's too much. Doesn't really look like an explosion, does it? It's pretty good. Start size, start rotation, start lifetime, start delay, no start delay. Okay, emission, let's go 50. Let's see what that does. That might be too much. Let's go 20. And really, it's just, play with your settings. That's pretty good. I like that. Size over lifetime. So the size over lifetime, you can. Oh, I thought you could. I guess you can't mess with it. Oh, because you have to enable it. Duh. So this is actually a curve. You can adjust the curve if you want to, but it looks like I've got something in here, curve between two constants. So let's go from size 0 to size 0.5. And then you need to adjust your max size again. Start size is 2, 1. Where's my max size? Max particle size. Texture sheet. Forces, size by speed, force, lifetime. Yeah, let's turn that off. So you get different size particles. You could actually make this 3, and then let's change our size over lifetime to 2. There we go. That's better. I like that one. Okay, so that's my particle emitter. Speed. Change my start speed. No, I must have that already. Okay. Emission rate 20 time distance. Time. Emit from shell. I actually forget what that does. Don't ask why I hit play. It's kind of emitting from the outside. Let's just keep it from the volume so it emits from the center. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So that's our particle. We'll just call it explosion. You can change colors too. And then just drag that on top of our prefab. Delete the instance in the hierarchy. Look at our explosion here. Now we need to set it up for the player. So come over to the player. If you don't have this prefab explosion variable exposed, double click on your player script and then uncomment it up here, and then make sure that you add this line down here on collision, instantiate prefab explosion, transform position, quaternion identity, which just means it adopts the position and rotation information from the player. So this is on collision with the enemy. We also need to make sure that with enemy move, actually, let's put it on the bullet. Bullet, if collision with the enemy, we will also instantiate. So we can just grab that same line there, pop it in there, instantiate prefab explosion, and then be sure to stick in your variable prefab explosion of type transform, and that should be fine. Okay, so then we'll come to our bullet prefab. Oh, that's right. So in order to have your bullet also cause the explosion to happen, you need to then, of course, access that component and feed it into it. So let's do that. All right. So unlike when we were trying to find the scorekeeper game object with the scorekeeper script attached to it, because we're looking for a prefab and not another game object, we should be able to just drag and drop right there. It should work. This is because the prefab explosion is also a universal thing because it's a prefab and it's fine. It works that way. So it is good. It's all good now. So just to reiterate, let's come back to our bullet. You don't need to add any sort of you don't need to add this part here essentially for the prefab explosion. It should just let you drop the explosion prefab onto the bullets variable. Save everything, hit play. Boom, there we go. Check that out. Blood and guts. Blood and pixel guts. That looks awesome. Okay, so that's how you do it. I think that lifespan of our emitter is perhaps just a bit much. Oh, but it's up to you. I'm gonna have it and see what that does. Remember, you can just edit your prefab. You don't need to change anything else anywhere else. That's better. That's shorter. Oh, it's still kind of persisting. I'm gonna get you. Wall of bullets. Okay, there we go. Nice. Okay, so that works. So that's what we're doing. That's what we're looking for. That's how you create essentially an Invaders clone. You have a score. You show some particle emissions whenever the enemies get destroyed. We'll see here in a sec how it works when the enemies hit the player. Just gonna let it keep running. So the things we added today, we added a start screen, an instruction screen, we added a scorekeeper, we added particle emitters, we learned how to jump between screens, we learned how to add to the score whenever we're instantiating, and then we learned how to set up a particle emitter. You can play around with the particle emitter as much as you want, add whatever you want to it, do different colors, I really don't care. If you wanted to get really wacky, you could figure out how to essentially change levels. So check to see if there are any enemies left. If there aren't any enemies left, load a new level or instantiate new enemies. You know, how do you keep... Oh, look at that. We don't have our collision. It's not colliding. Probably because I have it set up as a collider and not as a trigger. Remember, I have these are supposed to be triggers. Enter 2D, other collision, collider, 2D, collision game object. Destroy this. Okay, now it should work. And we have to sit here and wait for the entire time. I'll speed it up in the video. Maybe. I might make you just sit here. I don't know. It's ominous. Well, if you want to get really ambitious, you could add some sound too. Figure out how to do that. So these are things you can do on your own. Those are not required things. It's totally up to you guys. Boop, 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 boop. Missed him by a hair. Okay, here he comes. And boom, did not work. Oh no. Okay, so we do have an error here. We've got a problem. Houston, we have a problem. Look at our script. Trigger enter collision collider 2D if collision game object tag is enemy, instantiate prefab explosion, destroy collision game object. Okay, we need to also throw a debug log. Should be dead. All right. Okay, the invader is tagged as enemy. It is a trigger. The player is looking for a trigger. But the player does not have a rigid body, which could be the issue. Okay, so if the player doesn't have a rigid body, and I don't really want to put a rigid body on the player. Oh, and the player does not have an explosion attached. I figured out what my issue was with the collisions not happening on the player. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that the way that the 2D rigid bodies react is a little bit different than the way the 3D rigid bodies react. And I didn't realize it. So when we set the player to be kinematic and the bullet to also be kinematic so that they don't react to each other, that does change how they react to triggers. Kinematic rigid bodies can only interact with dynamic rigid bodies. They don't interact with any other kind of colliders. So what we have to do to fix it so that the player and the enemies can hit each other is that we need to stick a rigid body onto the enemies. Do that, change your gravity scale to 0. You can make it fixed angle, that's fine, but just don't select kinematic. If you don't select kinematic, do make sure that kinematic is selected on your bullet's rigid body and kinematic is selected on your player's rigid body. That should then work. I'm going to move my player up so we can kind of see it right away. It should all work as built. So we have nice big explosions. The other thing you'll need to do is, well, here, let's watch. Boom, okay, they died, good. The other thing you need to do is make sure that your top wall has a rigid body that is also fixed angle and is not kinematic. If it's not kinematic, then it's dynamic, and that's the key. Kinematic rigid bodies can only interact with dynamic rigid bodies. Oops. So do that. Make sure that you've got that set for all of them, so everything will have a rigid body, and your player and your bullet should have kinematic rigid bodies. Otherwise, you're good. Okay. If you have any questions or you need help with this, let me know. Shoot me an email, and we'll get it figured out.